This episode of the Auto Tech Show is brought to you by Comet Media, enabling businesses to turn their existing content into impactful short clips. Visit cometmedia.com/anyline for a free sample clip today. Hello and welcome everyone to this brand new episode of the Auto Tech Show. My name's Mark Babin, and as always, it's great to welcome you to the show today. It's another good one, so thanks for being here. Now, in today's episode, we're joined by Franck Leveque, a veteran of the European fleet and mobility industry, and now freelance consultant, to take a step back and explore the bigger picture of fleet transformation. As the European fleet market continues to grow, so do its challenges, ranging from operational complexity to fragmented service ecosystems. We'll dive into the current state of fleets in Europe, the central role of productivity and capacity utilization, and how integrated AI-driven solutions can unlock major gains. Then we'll turn our focus to tires, not as a simple commodity, but as connected data-rich assets essential to optimizing performance. So with that big introduction and that rather large agenda of what we're going to get into, Franck, thanks so much for being with me. Thanks for being on the show and giving us your time today. Looking forward to kind of diving into that insights of everything you've experienced through your career to where you are now.
Thank you, Mark, and hello to everyone. Great to be part of the show. And yes, maybe to introduce myself.
Please.
I always introduce myself personally as being French, educated in the UK, and living between Germany and Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And I consider myself a little bit like a European citizen. But from a career perspective, I spent 20 years with an organization called Frost & Sullivan, which is focused on research and consultancy. And I was a founding member of the mobility group within that organization. I then decided after 20 years to move to the industry side to see what it was like to be on the receiving end, so to say, and joined a great organization, Bridgestone Mobility Solution, which is actually the solution arm of the tire manufacturer Bridgestone, focusing on solutions dedicated to fleets, and where I was a VP of strategy and innovation.
Amazing.
So, yeah, my background has been mostly centered around automotive and transportation, mostly centered around growth strategy and innovation, with a red thread around connectivity, fleet, aftermarket, digital solutions for the automotive industry. That's really my focus, I would say, over the past 25 years of my career.
Fantastic. That's exactly where I want to start, because you have such you're developing that career through such an interesting time in the industry when so much was happening. Tech was coming into play and teams were changing their strategic initiatives and priorities. So you have such a nice insight. Maybe that's exactly where I want to start at a high level. So without going too deep here, but just to kind of establish that context, can you give us an overview of the European fleet market, where it is today, its size, its composition, maybe some of the unique challenges that, operators are facing, just that kind of high level start?
Yes, of course, Mark. So first of all, I'd like to say that, whatever we're going to discuss is in this interview is representing my own personal view, right?
Yes.
It does not reflect or imply on anything from my previous employers, and just wanted to clarify.
Absolutely.
But yes, indeed. So the fleet markets in Europe, you need to think of the European market in terms of vehicles on the road, data from the ACEA, focusing at Europe, so European Union, plus Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, and the UK. You have about 345 million vehicles on the road. What is it made of? It's made of about 300 million of passenger cars, 36 million of light commercial vehicles, and 9 million of medium heavy duty trucks and buses. And on top of that, you also have another 2.83 million of trailers. So this is the full vehicles on the road, so to say. But the fleet segment, the true fleet segment, is about 16% of those vehicles. So 100% of the truck and bus, pretty much, but lower penetration of fleet, of course, in the light commercial, and even less in the passenger vehicles. Although in Europe, as opposed to other parts of the world, this is an important segment. In fact, important to realize that in Europe, about 50% of the light vehicle registration, passenger vehicle in a large majority, is actually made to fleets. So 50% of all registration in Western Europe in particular is made only to fleets.
Wow.
That's an important element to keep in mind. And as vehicle age, they are exiting the fleet market and coming into private ownership in many cases. Another interesting angle is the development of leasing. Again, within that fleet environment, especially in the light vehicles, so light commercial and passenger cars, you have about just below 40% of vehicles that are actually leased, and that's financial lease and operating lease. And the final point I will say is that if you want to really look at differences across different types of fleets, you need to really maybe break it down into three categories. On one hand, you have the company cars. Mm-hmm. You have the service and maintenance vehicles, mostly light commercial vehicles. And in many cases, this is about transporting the business to where business needs to be done. And the third one is goods and people transportation, where the transportation is the core of the business. And the challenges that is associated to fleet management is actually different depending on these categories.
Okay, so it really depends, like where, I mean, it's such a broad, when we look at that fleet management, I guess it really does depend what kind of branch you go down. Holistically, I guess looking at it holistically, if we can, because I know, like you said, there are like very different details in kind of each branch, but holistically, when we're talking about productivity, there's so many different varieties of using the right type of fleet vehicle in the right market and for the right transport. When it comes to utilization of these different fleet types, is there sort of a simple answer to ultimate productivity, or does it really depend on each individual scenario?
Yeah, so challenges that fleets are facing are different across the different segments of fleets. So in the passenger car segment, is mostly around safety and sustainability. In the service and maintenance segment, will be around the fuel consumption and safety. In the transport and logistics, you will be, will have a focus on efficiency, productivity, sustainability, compliance, safety being an hygiene factor is expected in that segment. It's important to realize that in the transport and logistics segment, you're facing with companies that are running between 1% and 3% margin on average. So any improvements in efficiency or in productivity will have a direct impact on their bottom line.
How does that pressure then, that when we talk about like the pressure to perform, how does that impact the decisions made within these operations? Are they taking things slower, more conservative? Are they being more proactive in making bold choices? Because there is such a pressure, especially we see the sustainability topic and the safety topic are big ones right now, and you mentioned them. Is there this really heightened pressure to get it right? How does it kind of work within these organizations?
Yes, there definitely high pressure to tackle these issues. for the reason I just gave, which is, they are running as such, strained margins that, they are really looking for any ways to optimize their operation. We'll come back to efficiency, but
Yep.
I'd like to maybe deep dive into a specific area of productivity. It's one of my favorite topic, in fact, and something that I'm quite passionate about. Something that I identified many years back and still try to follow. But in essence, in the transport and logistics segment, it's important to realize that about 25% of all kilometers driven by trucks are actually driven completely empty.
I've heard about this as well. It's staggering that that's a real number.
And when they are not empty, they are using about 55 to 57% of the real capacity of the vehicle. That means that you have a capacity utilization of the on-road vehicle of around 40 to 45%. And then you need to think that the vehicles are actually only running a third of the time, because 2/3 of the time it's about driving time, it's about holidays, and so on and so forth. So you have an effective asset utilization of 13 to 15%. And you wonder how companies are driving profits. In fact, this last point is one of the most critical components for the deployment of autonomous trucks. Because if you can run a vehicle 80% of that time, so 20 hours out of 24, keeping time for maintenance and so on and so forth, loading and loading, then you actually change the dynamics significantly. But why is there this fundamental waste at the base, the 25% you mentioned, we mentioned earlier? First is structural, because the flow of goods goes in more in one direction than the other. There's more goods going from Rotterdam to inland than from inland to Rotterdam. That's a fact.
Yep.
So you won't be able to bring that value down to zero, but there's improvement that can be made. Second is an issue of fragmentation of the supply, fragmentation of the demand. You need to think that 80% of the vehicles is actually in fleets of less than 20 vehicles. Right, so you have a very, very fragmented transportation sector, even though it is sort of consolidating at the moment as a consequence of the challenges that the industry is facing. And the third point, and probably the most important point in this case, is the fact that you have processes that are remaining heavily analog and siloed, which restrict the capacity to build the necessary digital visibility that will allow to optimize supply and demand, making sure that you're able to bring the right truck that is in the vicinity for the right purpose, and wherever it comes from. So that is something that I'm quite passionate to see how we can improve this waste in the industry at the moment.
I like that you brought up that analog kind of as that last point. It kind of bridges to the next topic I want to get into, which obviously bringing in this element of technology. I think over the last decade, you could probably even expand that decade into 4 more years, given your experience, but we've seen it just rapidly advance exponentially these last years. So many solutions on the market, so many different problems trying to be solved with different types of solutions, whether it's software, hardware, and the list goes on. Yet we still see these analog, siloed out pieces of information, processes not being optimized. Why, in your opinion, is this such a gap? Why is this such a barrier to integration for a lot of fleet management companies?
It's a question of maturity, first of all, right? So not all fleets, depending on their side, have the same management maturity, and it's about education as well to a certain extent, and background of these company business leaders, but indeed, you have a very diverse market in terms of the number of solutions that fleet managers have to deal with. I'll come back to that. And within each of the category, you have a very, very fragmented supplier environment. So you have a very complex ecosystem of solutions and of players that deliver solutions to the fleet operators. Just to give a few examples, and by no means exhaustive, you have solutions that are focusing on service and maintenance. You have solutions that are focusing on acquisition and remarketing of the vehicle. You have solutions focusing on expense management, fleet telematics, solution for regulatory compliance or fines management, insurance and financing, driving license management, transport management system, yard management, warehouse management, load brokerage, TCO management. All of this, believe it or not, in many cases is actually the interfaces that one person has to deal with, the fleet manager, right? In many cases, you have multiple solutions and multiple providers per category within a given organization, within a given fleet. Why? Because, it's legacy systems from acquisitions sometimes. Sometimes it's the fact that you had a distributed decision making within the organization across depots, across countries, that lead to this diversity of solutions. And sometimes the solutions are complementary, sometimes they are redundant. Sometimes that complementarity, just to give you an example, some solutions are focusing on the driver, some solutions are focusing on the vehicle, some solutions are focusing on the trailer or the container, or are focusing on the cargo and cold chain, for example, or are very geographically focused. And for that reason, diverse and sort of geographically spread organization have to work with different companies. Maybe just to continue on that, that diversity of solutions, that diversity of players that fleet have to deal with is resulting in what I call the multi-screen syndrome. What is a multi-screen syndrome is basically the fact that fleet managers have to deal with so many different interfaces, having applications in multi-screens in the front of them at all time, open at all time, in order to be able to do their job. And that, for me, is actually defining a strong opportunity to help integrate these data sources into a smart interface. A smart interface that will actually benefit the fleets in terms of efficiency, in terms of optimization, in terms of solution usability, because in many cases, they use only a small share of the potential of these solutions that they have on board. Right now you have a new category of players that is actually coming to play, called fleet data aggregator, that basically aim at bringing these data sources together into a single source of truth, so to say, for the data, and will help fleet managers to have an end-to-end view on all the data activities associated to their vehicles and to their fleet.
It's exactly what I wanted to ask about, because obviously with all these different solutions you mentioned, and it's not an exhaustive list, I'm sure it could go on and on. With so many different pieces, obviously having everything digitized is the first priority to be able to bring it into systems. But then, as you just mentioned on your final point there, bringing it all into like a single dashboard or a single wall where everything is visible without having this having to look at multiple screens and be engaged with multiple apps. The first word that obviously comes to mind when I think about this process, and I hate that I'm even saying it because it's becoming overused in every way, but AI has to play a role in this, right? When we look at this end-to-end type of solution, this single dashboard, being able to compute massive amounts of data into a single decision-making dashboard, call it. Do you think that it will play this instrumental role?
You know, AI is a key word at the moment. There's no doubt about it. It has so much potential for us in the transportation sector, in the fleet sector, and across all industries. In fact, there's no doubt about it. And with the risk of oversimplifying, I would say that for me, artificial intelligence in this space, at least, can be associated to a smart algorithm, right? So I like this oversimplification in a way because I try to bring it down a little bit, because there are plenty of use cases, plenty of deployment. On various parts of the industry, across the industry by many players. So yes, we hear AI, artificial intelligence, right, left, and center at the moment, but clearly it has a potential to really change the way we work, and probably transform the industry as we know it today.
Are you seeing areas where it is already making significant impact? Have you seen specific areas within fleet that are fully utilizing this technology?
I think we are from a solution perspective, we are at the start. I'll deep dive into two areas, maybe sub topics of AI. One being Gen AI, and the other one being agentic AI. So really, for me, Gen AI, provides amazing opportunities to improve customer support, for example. Right, really, customer support for fleet management, and the service around fleet management, is 80% of relatively basic incoming calls that can be automated and deliver a superior service still. It's also a solution that can help to improve or support technical support, by basically allowing workshop and field technicians to get access to the technical data at the tip of their finger at any time, reducing repair times and reducing downtime as a consequence. So there are many applications that we are starting to see developing, that we are starting to see coming together, both internally for this organization, but also for interfacing with customers or interfacing with partners.
Yeah, and it is fun to see because it is a whole new expansion of the technology we've seen over the past years, the decade. I'm sure this type of technology has been in production and being built for a long time. It's nice to finally see it coming to market and being used, as you said, kind of at that starting phase of where we're at now. Are you making the most out of your top performing content? Our sponsor for this episode, Comet Media, will enable you to turn your high-performing content into impactful short clips that get insane reach. They do this for us and more than 30 other B2B companies, helping get as much as 700,000 views on a single short. If you're interested in getting short, impactful clips and increasing your reach, then Comet is an option you need to consider. And as a special offer for today, you can get a free sample clip by visiting cometmedia.com/anyline. Again, that's cometmedia.com/anyline for a free sample clip today. I want to shift gears a little bit and look at the tire aspect. Obviously, it's something you have a lot of experience in. It's something that we know is very analog at its core, is in the process of becoming more of a digital asset. If we look at it beyond just a commodity, as I mentioned sort of in that introduction, we know they're essential for safety, for efficiency, and for data collection on the vehicles itself. How, given your background in tires and the true value of them, how should fleet managers think about the tires in their fleet, perhaps differently than they are now?
Well, I think the tire, generally, the value of the tire, in my mind, is truly, or generally underappreciated. It's a very critical piece of technology. In fact, very often mentioned as the last, thing between the vehicle and the infrastructure, the road surface. Which has many implications, many fundamental implications on the vehicle itself, from driving dynamics, safety, braking, NVH, comfort, fuel consumption is all, linked in some ways to the performance of the tires. So the performance of the inherent product, of course, but also the performance and the way the tires are being managed throughout their product's life cycle. So what I've found is what we found and what we know is from research is that in many cases there's a significant share of tires that are either overinflated or underinflated. What does it mean? Why is it so important, right? Overinflation basically bears the risk of safety blow-ups. It leads to irregular wear and will increase vehicle downtime, which equates to cost for the fleet. Underinflation, is basically has the same implications, but also a significant impact on fuel consumption due to the higher resistance on the road surface from the tire. So, I think it's really critical to, look at how this tire function is being managed by the fleets. And today you have increasing amount of data that is accessible. Thanks to regulations, the regulation for TPMS, for example, that is making that data accessible in the vehicle. But that data being accessible in the vehicle is not sufficient. Because in the end, that data needs to flow into the telematic systems or into the maintenance management system. So the necessary actions, immediate or delayed, are being taken depending on the severity of the problem at play. Right? That's really important. But I think there's great opportunities through that digitization, through that sensorization, whether it's direct or indirect sensorization, to build a better visibility, real-time visibility, to bring higher efficiency and optimization in the management of the tire function for the fleet management.
I think it's really interesting, especially given obviously the time you had at Bridgestone specifically and the major role you played there. As we kind of merge this technology we spoke about and AI and what you just touched on, is there this massive opportunity to take advantage of this information that tires develop and the efficiency, safety, and all the implications that it can have on a fleet. Are there specific innovations around the tire, perhaps data capture or data utilization, that you're perhaps excited to see, or one that is going to provide a lot of opportunity down the road?
So once again, I don't want to comment too much about Bridgestone, but for me, innovation is a key success factor for any organization, right? That's a fact. But on one hand, you have some incremental innovation on the tire themselves, and then you have many innovation, as you were saying, around the tire that are there to improve the overall product life cycle and usage of the tire. I will dare to say that in many cases the technology is not necessarily the issue. The technologies are there today. Yeah. Where I see the greatest opportunity is to actually bring those various solutions seamlessly together with data at the core, and that's the challenge. The challenge is in the technical integration. As well as, and probably more importantly, in building the business model that flies both in the short, medium, and longer term. In many cases, these business models are AI-driven, AI first, and building that flywheel that will actually drive, more data, more customers, more partners, and sort of create that momentum is something that is challenging as a business model to get going.
Are fleet managers prepared for that challenge? Are they prepared for what this could unlock? Do you feel like it's something they're just pushing down the road as long as they can? Is it something they're excited to sort of jump into? What's your impression?
I think some fleet managers are seeing that. I think this innovation is mostly from the suppliers' perspective, right? To deliver these solutions, and the important is to make sure that those solutions are customer centric, that they really serve a customer purpose. Tackle a challenge that the fleets are facing, but if I come back to the challenges of multi-screen challenges, or efficiency, productivity, sustainability, compliance, it's a very, very complex and challenging environment to manage, being a fleet manager today. So there's many things that can be done, but today, one of the challenges of managing fleets is a lack of data. Mm-hmm. Lack of data. Yes. Well, some will say no. Lack of actionable information. Sometimes too much data. But data is useless if it's not made actionable, if it's not linked to a specific actions for maintenance or for additional, cargo utilization. So the focus has to be on actionable information. But what it also allows, is to think about new business models. Mm-hmm. Data opens the door to new business models. One of which is, the development of, what we call X as a service. Whether it's vehicle as a service, truck as a service, tire as a service, everything as a service. In reality, that's why we call it X as a service. But X as a service cannot operate sustainably without, access to data at its core. I often say that if you don't have, digital visibility in deploying an X as a service business model, you have two scenarios. Either you overprice yourself to cater for the sort of the risk due to usage, mm-hmm. or you will underprice yourself trying to be competitive, but risk the company.
Something you said that's interesting, and I think maybe a lot of companies struggle with, is the quality of data that you bring in. Obviously, it has to be, data as itself is useless. I 100% agree with you, but the quality of data that you make decisions on is also another massive challenge, I think, for many people. Garbage in, garbage out. Do you feel like today in this with all the solutions and all the technology we have available, poor data quality is no longer an excuse. It shouldn't be a thing that we deal with anymore. Is that a real? Can that be reality? Should it be reality?
In a in an AI first organization is something that, at the beginning data is not good, right? But this should not be an excuse not to do it. In fact, we should build the processes that helps to continuously improve that data through more usage. So the more customers, the more data, the better the product, and the better the product, the more partners are willing to come on the platform, the more customers are interested. That is the fundament of an AI first organization. And I think, in this world that we are talking about of fleet management services today, that AI first approach is fundamental to the future success.
And hopefully companies are taking those steps towards it, whether it's building the right teams, opening the right doors, as well as just simply being open to making those changes. I know in conversations I've had past it does really seem like there are companies and industry leaders that are proactive in this sense and are making those steps or have been making those steps for a number of years. So they're in a good spot now. And there's some surprising names on these lists that are still very conservative, still very against massive change or adoption. Obviously, the answer to where success is, we know where that's going to be, and that's that proactive approach. Why do you think these big names still resist that step towards being an AI-driven organization or an innovation culture organization? Why is there such a gap still for some big names?
I think it's difficult to build an AI-first organization or a sort of a data-driven platform where you allow for not just allow, drive cooperation with partners where no one is a competitor, but everyone is a potential partner. This is a different management mindset.
Yeah.
And very often the most critical challenge for organizations to overcome, more than the technical element, is the mindset.
Yeah, I definitely think, and it is nice to see you go to shows these days or conferences and various events, and you do see much more of an open culture than you would have years ago. I think that's quite encouraging as well to see. The last thing I want to address with you is this topic of disruption. I think we're seeing it as a major factor in a lot of what we see today, solution-based, operational efficiency-based, and so on. In some of the prep information that we had for this call, obviously in the discussions we had prior to today, you mentioned applying the Clayton Christensen theory of disruption to the tire market. Can you break that down for the audience a little bit?
Yes, certainly. In fact, I recently attended a course from a Harvard Business School online, and I was reminded of Professor Clayton Christensen's work on disruptive innovation and the powerful theory he actually developed. And Christensen's illustrative story on steel manufacturing is, I think, particularly insightful and relevant to our world. I'll try to explain a little bit, but and quite succinctly. But in essence, until the late 70s, steel manufacturing was almost exclusively based on what is called an integrated manufacturing model that covered the 4 or 5 different segments of quality that steel comes in. In the late 70s, you had a new set of players coming with a new manufacturing process called mini mills. And these mini mills achieved a 20% lower cost than integrated manufacturing, which, when you consider this is a commodity, is significant, of course, right? It achieved a lower quality, but at a significantly lower price. So, the market became quite competitive. The mini mill players, drove the traditional players out of the lower segment, and just due to basically price competition that they were able to achieve, still from the mini mills being profitable, whilst the traditional players were struggling to make that segment profitable for themselves. Until the last sort of traditional player exited that segment. So what happened when that last traditional player exited that segment is that the mini mill players started to compete fiercely, and the price in that segment dropped by 20%.
Wow.
Making it difficult for the mini mill players to actually compete and make profits. So in the face of this challenge, what they did is they improved their manufacturing process and were able to go one step up in the quality sort of segment of the steel manufacturing. Soon enough, they took over, the majority of that segment, and soon enough, the last traditional player exited the market, and same story again. And they exited the market, the segment, for good reason, right? They were making losses on that segment.
Yeah.
And they were able to actually make more profit in the higher segment. So good decisions from a profitability perspective, right? And the story within 20 years repeated itself 3 or 4 times to come to a situation whereby, the mini mill took over about 70% of the market and integrated manufacturing the rest, of course.
Yeah.
So, this is quite interesting from my perspective, and I think we can almost, feel some analogy to, various commodity product markets that we know very well.
Yeah. Given that loop, what is your message then to those listening, the major players, the newcomers? How do we apply that dynamic as educational, as something to learn from? And how does that affect the future of this industry as an ecosystem?
From my humble perspective, right? I'm not a professor.
From your experience perspective,
but from my own experience, I do believe there is some interesting and relevant learning here. First learning from my perspective is that a low-cost strategy only works if you have high-cost competitor in the market. Mm-hmm. The second one is that traditional players willingly exit a market segment in the pursuit of higher margins, right? But exiting a market segment altogether is actually allowing new competition to grow, new competition to strengthen, to learn, and apply that learning to tackle the next segment and further compete with the incumbent. New companies kill incumbents by disrupting them, not by competing heads on. So the new companies kill incumbents by disrupting them without them realizing. And that's the importance of this message of the mini mill versus the integrated manufacturing players, which you can almost apply to the tire market if you want. I personally believe that product characteristics and performance are, of course, paramount in our capacity to compete in the market. But the reality is that today, the performance gap between, traditional players, premium players, and new players is actually reducing at a fast pace. So the key sustainable differentiation will actually come from business innovation, in my mind, business model innovation, and the capacity to deploy integrated business model, integrated mobility solutions.
That's ultimately what we want to see happen is for that sort of to break that mold a little bit as well. That brings massive opportunity then. So I guess kind of as a final note for those in the industry to really take that lesson to heart and take advantage of that opportunity.
It is. I think the other message is that no one can actually do it all by themselves.
Yeah.
And I think everyone needs to be open to integrate or be integrated, because that is actually increasing, by definition, the size of the pie.
I think we see that happen more and more. We're seeing more of these partnerships and collaborations form as well than perhaps in the past. So I think that's a nice way to think of it and a nice kind of a positive outtake as well. And I think we are seeing these conversations happen. As I mentioned earlier, that when I go to a show these days, you see a lot more people talking collaboratively and in a partnership mindset rather than in the past. It was just straight end-to-end competition. So I think that's really nice. And hopefully it's something that we continue to see advance further on with it's the only way we push the needle forward. Otherwise we just end up in this loop cycle like you mentioned. And I don't think that's super positive for the long term as well. But no, it's a really interesting concept, and I'm glad you were able to share it, and as well as your learnings and your perspective from it. It's a nice way to sort of round out the conversation and bring it back. But yeah, Frank, this has been really good. I've learned a ton. I know just in chatting with you beforehand and some research, obviously for the topics, it's a really interesting angle that we were able to discuss today, and hopefully, like I said, the audience was able to take something away from it. But first and foremost, Frank, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Any final comments from you before we bring things to an end? Anything we may have missed?
Maybe one last point. I think for everyone to keep in mind in terms of innovation and to look at is probably agentic AI, because that's the next big hype, so to say,
okay.
And enormous potential when it comes to helping to deal with smart interfaces, smart integration of multitasks activities. And its major differentiation with Gen AI is that it's focused on action. It interacts with its environment, but focus on actioning the information.
Which is that next step and is going to have a huge implication as well. I think that's a fantastic final point. Frank, again, thank you so much for today. Really appreciate you having the time and having this conversation with me.
Pleasure. Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And for everyone watching and listening to this episode of the Auto Tech Show, tons to digest in this one. Lots of takeaways, some great insights from Frank. Honor to have him on the show. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as well. If you have comments or questions about what you've heard today, head down to the podcast notes. There'll be some resources to check out. Get in touch with myself or Frank, ask questions, start conversations. Love having those talks with you guys as listeners, as an audience. So please do feel free to go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we'll bring this episode to a close. Thank you all so much for being with me. It's been great having you. We'll see you on the next episode of the Auto Tech Show very soon. Bye for now. Again, a big thank you to our sponsor for this episode of the Auto Tech Show, Comet Media. Visit cometmedia.com/anyline for a free sample clip today.